Well, a lot has been said in the discussion about young people, the labour market and trade unions, and this sector of our workforce constantly complains about unemployment, the lack of opportunities. Let's look at the involvement of young people and if they are using trade unions to engage with the labour market. We're joined in the studio by labour analyst Mamageti Molopiane. Good to have you.
Hi,
Thank
Leon.
you. Thanks for coming in on this Workers' Day. Before we talk about young people and labour unions, just give us an overview of labour on this Workers' Day.
Well, South Africa's labour has come far. Organised labour has come far. We workers were part of the dismantling of apartheid. They mobilised very well in those days. But post-94, one of the challenges that organised labour and trade unions and their federations are struggling with is finding a way to define themselves. And by that I mean, how do we attract more young workers? Secondly, they are also struggling to keep up with the changing definitions of what is work? How do we define work? In the 80s, work used to be 8 to 5 factories and mines, but now people can work from home. We are moving towards what is called knowledge economy. So the definition of work falls away. The working hours falls away, and we are finding that trade unions are struggling to keep up with that, but also they're struggling to resonate with young workers. Graduates who are unemployed or graduates who are getting into work are struggling to find a common link where their parents were trade unionists or members of a trade unions. They are not that much interested.
So they're not really interested in joining. I mean, that was one of the issues that I wanted to raise with Zwelinzima Vavi about the new SAFTU union. We're seeing a trend around the world that labour unions are actually diminishing, that you're finding that workers are not joining them purely because they're casual workers. They don't want to have to worry about being a part of a union. This trend, though, in South Africa, I mean, when you see a new union starting and automatically have a membership of 700,000, there obviously is still a very big demand for labour unions in South Africa, though. Absolutely.
I mean, South Africa, to an extent, is an anomaly. And I say that because trade unions within South Africa are so deeply entrenched in the politics of our politics, but also that they are very active and very vocal and are perceived as being very strong. So while it's not surprising that Zwelinzima Vavi might, and the collective might start a new federation and it might have 700,000 members, one must not forget that part of that includes the NUMSA members who were, of course, without the federation after being expelled from COSATU. And in saying unions and organised labour movements in South Africa must redefine who they are, must reinvent themselves, and must find a way of resonating with young workers and graduates, because we have seen what has become clear with Fees Must Follow us, that young students and future young workers can organize themselves without the traditions of trade unions. And therefore, any new federation, any new union that is arising, if it cannot speak to their needs, it runs the risk of not including them. And therefore, I do not see how it's going to survive, given that our population and the rest of the continent is going to be the youngest population in the world in the next 20 years.
When you look at, and this generation that's coming up is a very different generation to what we know, because I think, as you mentioned, you know, the unions were very intermingled with politics. That's just the way that the unions operated, particularly here in South Africa. But you're seeing the youth coming up. They want different demands. They're looking for different things, and they want protection from other issues. Do you think that unions need to change their focus? Do unions need to, in a way, revolutionize the way we're watching the youth revolutionize their movements?
Absolutely. The youth call it, they're saying everything intersects. There's an intersection within the struggle of the workers and the struggle of women and the struggle of students. So unless unions are able to pick up on that workers' issue cannot simply be raised in silo, because the very worker who you are demanding a better wage for is affected by a community that doesn't have water, because they return back to the community after work. Unless unions finds a way of integrating those issues, because we are talking about intersectionality. Unless unions find a way of saying to a young woman worker, I represent your rights, I fight for your rights as a worker, but I equally recognize your rights as a young woman, and that you would need more time for maternity, or that you would need more time. You would want a working condition that enables you to be able to attend to your children's school activities. If they cannot do that, they run the risk of being perceived as linear in their focus of work, that only unions are defined by workers' issues. And I think as South Africa's democracy is growing and maturing, and we are seeing how society and the communities out there are voicing their concern, unless they find a way to not only touch on workers' issues at that moment at the workplace, but workers' issues that affects them outside work, then they have a crisis of existence, is what I would call it.
Absolutely. Just very quickly as we wrap up this interview, if we look at membership of unions and we look at, I don't know if it's ever been done, or if you perhaps look at it, the average age, the age groupings of unions, what are we looking at? Because you mentioned very earlier that the youth are not, the young workforce is not necessarily taking to unions or being a part of them. So what do they look like? What does the face of a union look like?
Well, the face of a union differs per industry and per union and per sector per se. You have the auto sector, and the auto sector is slowly becoming, the motor industry sector is slowly becoming automated. And so they are looking for, the employers are looking for differently qualified people. So you have higher numbers of young workers. You have sectors like mine workers, where it's still dominant middle age or older people. And then you have upcoming sectors. If you look at sectors such as retail, if you look at hospitality, if you look at temporary work, you're looking at younger people who are looking for work, who've just got into work and are getting their foot into the workplace. So they differ in the South African context, but are still mostly dominant, but what we would call a middle-aged, older generation of people. You can even see it in its leadership structures. And also that's one of the critical aspects here, and that leadership structures do not reflect the youth in the union, and hence they do not find them so appealing.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for talking to us here on Morning Live. The future of trade unions. If the youth are not taking to the trade unions, then where does that leave them? Very, very interesting question, going into a little crystal ball into the future for us here. Mamokgethi Molopiane, thank you. Thanks for talking to us here on the program. She, of course, is a labour analyst.